Okay, welcome to the University of Maine and IEEE Artificial Intelligence webinar series. Today we have artificial intelligence for space as our topic, and we have two excellent speakers selected for you. I know you're connecting from all over the world, so good morning, good afternoon, and good night, depending on where you're coming from. Before we get started with introduction to our speakers, I want to thank the sponsor of this webinar series. So IEEE Maine Communication and Computer Society is the main sponsor, as well as IEEE Region 1. We are also fortunate to have the sponsorship and publicity from IEEE USA, and also from our colleagues in IEEE China and IEEE India, as well as Silicon Valley section. So thank you everybody for promoting this and sponsoring this event. The organization behind the scene is done through a sponsorship from University of Maine Office of Vice President for Research. So I'm going to be moderating this session. My name is Abedi. I'm Associate Vice President for Research at University of Maine. The format is that we start with the speakers. Each of them will present around 15 to 20 minutes. And you can post your questions in the Q&A session. Don't use chat for that, just use the Q&A. And then at the end, after we finish both the speakers' talks, we'll try to get as many questions as we can. And the recordings will also be posted later on. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Janette Briones, Principal Investigator of SCAN, Cognitive Communication System Project at NASA Glenn Research Center. Dr. Briones earned her doctorate of philology in computer engineering in 2014. She is currently the PI for the Cognitive Communication Project at NASA Space Communication Navigation Program. She's also responsible for leading and coordinating cognitive communication technology development and demonstration of new high payoff space technologies that will promote mission utilization of cognitive communications, thereby expand the capabilities of NASA GRC. So I don't want to take too much time and read the entire bio. You can see that in the flyer. So we try to give more time to our speaker, but without further ado, it's my pleasure to ask Dr. Briones to start her presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the introduction and for the invitation to this launch webinar series. So like he said, I'm going to give you an overview of the cognitive communications and AI ML application, especially in the networking area. Okay, so the Cognitive Communications Project's role is to define and demonstrate NASA future cognitive space communication system so that SCAN can provide new and enhanced services to agency missions and confidently move towards implementation. The project consists of 3 interconnected elements. First one is the systems definition, which establishes an overall system vision along with incremental systems, ConOps, and architectures. System integration and demonstration, which builds prototype systems and demonstrate performance in our cognitive ground testbed. And finally, operational experiments to produce data for validation. A future cognitive system, it's defined by a set of incremental systems that grow in complexity and maturity. The initial system on the top focuses on automation and putting foundational building blocks such as automated scheduling, automated data routing. We want to automate as much of the processes as we can, since this is our foundational building block to cognitive. The next system is a reactive system where we start to incorporate system spectrum awareness, sensing the environment and responding or reacting to it in case of an interfere or malfunctioning nodes. Next, building on that is where you start to get prediction. You start sensing the environment, then you have AI and ML recognizing patterns or trends of where data is going or what the signal or sensor is telling you. Or the other case would be, where the quality of service metrics on the network is. So if you start seeing that that is going to go in a certain direction that we don't like, the network is going to predict that and react on that automated fashion before the problem occurred. This keeps on building a capability, and ultimately we want to build a full cognitive system that will learn and adapt to changing conditions. We have three technology areas in the project: adapted links, which are attempting to optimize performance, networking, increasing the useful data through, and system management, which you include efficient utilization of resources and decision making processes. These areas will come together to create those prototype incremental systems, which will be demonstrated on the cognitive testbed that we're building at GRC. The testbed will help us move from emulation to a more realistic environment, so we can validate our data, its performance, and be able to show the benefits of cognitive technologies. The last element in the project is the operational experiment for validation. Partnerships for flight opportunity are being pursued to conduct validation of core technologies, and then capture data for validation of our testbed capabilities, and then mature those technologies for future demonstrations. We will continue to identify flight opportunities through support our ability to demonstrate one or more of the incremental systems which is networking. Cognitive networking encompasses technology areas to develop autonomous network implementations that sense and adapt to optimize networks and system level performance. This is just a summary of the different concepts we're developing or are under development for the networking area. So before I get into the AI ML concepts, I want to introduce DTN and give you an overview of delay tolerant network, or DTN for short. So DTN is trying to develop protocols where terrestrial protocols fail due to long distances. For example, between Mars to the Earth, the delays are going to be too long for acknowledgement based protocols. The rates of the links are often asymmetric, and they could also be disconnections between the links. There will be cases where a rover on Mars might be driving around in an area that is uneven, and maybe sometimes is disconnected in ways that are not going to be known. Routing for DTN focuses on this case of a network where you don't necessarily have a known end-to-end path through the network. It seems that the embedded video is not playing, but I'm just gonna keep going. In this DTN scenario, you could see with the emulation, where the link becomes connected, you're supposed to have an image being transmitted. So you can see already the full image on the left, where when a link is established. We will send as much data as the link can accommodate for a given contact duration. But when you see these white lines, it's because some of the pieces are missing. So we need to replace those last fragments. So you will have a capability where we are going to be able to know when all of these pieces are there, how to reassemble them, and how to go back and fill the ones that are missing. And that is another kind of area, the fragmentation, data, and storage. So what is the routing problem? Routing becomes more complicated as the size of the network increases. Routing in multi-hop networks may be based on deterministic contacts. We have always performed the orbital analysis by the TLEs of the satellites and known their locations, we can always perform, there are algorithms that take into account the known contacts, the start and stop time between the nodes, the storage capacity, so that DTN, so for DTN, the basic concept is that you need to store the data on a node locally until the link becomes available. When it becomes available, you go ahead and start sending data to any neighbor that can possibly transfer that data to the final destination. We have to have storage capability on the nodes. We also need to take into account network congestion. There is also the link capacity and data rates, where we have considered data volume, so how much data to transmit, and the duration, and the quality or signal strength, or the BER, bit error rate. So one approach is drop data anywhere. If you see the diagram in the left, it shows, one DTN node, a relay service, 3 ground stations, where data is being sent in fragments using distributed storage to each of the ground stations. And the data will eventually be reassembled in the ground. So that's one of the concepts that we have developed. The next one, we're supposed to be 2 videos. These are 2 core emulation environments. It uses Linux container in each of the dots that you can barely see on the left diagram. Those are Linux container that runs the DTN software. You can see that it's supposed to be sending pings between the nodes, and when the nodes are connected. This is a way to run different routing algorithms and save the traces of the network, just to be able to use that for machine learning models. We use this type of emulations because we don't always have the flight capability to do this, and to be able to create the data and try our software or different algorithms. The emulation on the bottom was using some data from ZebraNet experiment that was actually tracking zebras on the ground. We also did some orbital analysis for ISS scenario, as shown in the top right. And we did this to study more of the opportunistic routing algorithms, where there is no predictability of the network, just assuming that they are random and trying to find patterns within the data and the connectivity between the nodes. So in this case, we try a multi-label classification approach, where we try to determine the path through the network. The classification runs a single answer, a yes/no answer. The route may consist of several nodes. They are labeled as 1, indicating that one particular package of data has visited that node. For every node that we have, it's labeled for. We did this over and over, and we were able to see the paths that resulted in the delivery of the data. At a given time, the best route was a chain of specific nodes in the network. This is the concept for routing, where a node senses that an event changed, then it would load the learning model. So it searched for possible neighbors and also all of the data that we have stored. Then if you go through these other criteria related to DTN, we decide which bundle or package to pick or to choose. If we predict from this node to the destination, there is a likelihood that it will be delivered. Then we go ahead and send that bundle or package, and then the transfer will be completed at that time. We also work with early career faculty. So Dr. Ricardo Lent is from the University of Houston. He got a 2-year grant and has been working on an adaptive data routing with cognitive gateway using spiky neural networks. He developed a cognitive network controller based on spiky neural networks. It was used on board the ISS as part of scan testbed to select the best path to send data through. He also has a couple of implementations based on FPGA as well as Python. He developed a physical lab testbed in Houston, and we also developed a cloud-based testbed to collaborate and test his algorithm. So this is a paper that was recently published in the Cognitive Communications for Aerospace Applications Workshop, long of a name, that was held in back in June. We performed the orbital analysis for multi-hop routing scenarios inspired by several swarm missions, so a lot of nodes. We developed a DTN routing algorithm that uses spiky neural networks to adapt to changes in the network and select the optimal route. We generated the contact plans that are fed into an environment using Python that simulates the disconnections of the nodes. The nodes are using EC2 scripts to emulate 12 nodes in AWS cloud that will turn on and off the network interfaces. We use the cloud to experience with the different size node, and it provided a way to collaborate with the professor within the cloud since we're still not back in the lab. So this gave us, the opportunity to still collaborate with him and test his software and be, and collaborate as much as we could. This cognitive space gateway uses the cognitive network controller, or CNC, as the decision-making element and uses reward shaping to determine instantaneous rewards for reinforcement learning that adapt to CNC to changes in the network. This is our cloud test environment. It is, like I said, a Python base. We have test data flowing from one node. Then we have two nodes, 1067 and 1061, which has a LAS associated with it. So the CNC learned that this is not an optimal path. It is nice to use the cloud to experience with different instances. It has one CPU, 1 GB of RAM. It was limited though to 2 networks interfaces. So IP tunnels were unused. So that's one of the drawbacks on that. This is a typical observations for a flow send at 10 bundles per second. Both the CSG and the shortest ETA method attempt to minimize the bundle delivery time. So these plots show that compared to the shortest path algorithm, the CSG learns which links to avoid and is able to perform better than the standard algorithm. So that's where some of the findings by doing these time series observations. Another experiment was using deep reinforcement learning for message fragmentation. We apply AI ML to more than just routing. We included link quality estimation and message fragmentation and storage management. In this case, we just wanted it to experiment with OpenAI Gym environment. We have never used it before and learn this reinforcement learning environment. This is trying to come up with a model that will take in link predictions and then determine which link to select, and also how much data selected to send to that link. This is in this simulation, we generated input data. we take into account when this data rate is optimal. The agent should not send data when there is no output rate predicted. And we calculated the data storage. The action was the number of fragments to send. It performs well. So some of the findings included that this is okay. It's okay for just one node, and learn that JIP is not ready for more than one. Okay. Next, we had three students during the summer working on a multi-agent cognitive networking system for the lunar environment. So one student was looking at DTN software and at a flight-like board that is used on some CubeSat missions that we're looking at. Another student was looking at some wireless data for link quality estimation and worked on data visualization, and also develop a machine learning model by hand and compare that with the AWS SageMaker AutoTune to see the advantage of it. And then a third student worked on the multi-objective reinforcement learning. This student used Ray or RLib that it did incorporate a GIM, but it had an actual multi-agent environment. She learned how to use it and then develop a system of system concepts. So that was a good, summer project that incorporated three different areas and, into one. Okay, I mentioned we have two other areas in, which is the adaptive links and system management. So here we are applying machine learning techniques to the physical and the link layer to improve communication system performance, robustness, and environmental awareness. We have a couple of small concepts as well. Adaptive coding modulation, where it's looking at modern standards. One is the DBBS2 waveform, which provides robust links. We also have interface mitigation. So let me go ahead and show the first one. So this shows the benefits by adding adapted coding and modulation. This had a 4.4 dB performance improvement by just adding adaptive to the variable coding and modulation. And we're in the process of gaining more performance metrics by doing more cognitive applications such interface mitigation. So we will get, those TBD will be filled as soon as, as we implement these different concepts. So the objective of the interference mitigation is to minimize the impact of RF interference in shared spectrum among growing numbers of NASA, government, and commercial users. This approach was to sense and avoid the RF interference by controlling link parameters. So you start to see, working with your software-defined radios and tuning some of those parameters. So you can, move away from the interfere. The other area was on the system management. So this is just showing, one concept, which is the automated scheduling. This one it's a multi-objective scheduling optimization algorithm. And we're looking at, different service providers working with their scheduling, so we can come up with an API so we can talk to their scheduling software, so we can schedule our assets using that method. We have done a lot of, or written technical papers. I'm showing here some of the papers that got presented at the cognitive communications, at the Cognitive Communications for Aerospace Applications Workshop, or CCAA for short. This is every other year. The Cognitive Communications Project and IEEE host this workshop. This year we had 5 technical papers in the area I just talked about. Some of the papers is the work that we're doing with the ECF professor, Dr. Land, and others, like the one in the bottom, it's collaboration we have done with SBIRs, or small business innovation research companies. So there's, a lot of opportunities for us to publish the technical work that we're doing. And there's a scan if you want more information, all the papers from the previous 2, because we have done this 3 times, 2017, 2019, and 2021. So all the papers are there. If they have a link, the website has a link to all the papers, and the presentations are also there. And if you want more information, just email me, contact me, and I will be able to share the proceedings with anybody. I think that's it for me. Thank you for the invitation, and I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Briones, for the great presentation. I just want to remind everybody that please post your question in the Q&A section, and we'll answer those after the next presentation. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our next presenter, Dr. Nargess Memarsadeghi. Dr. Memarsadeghi is a senior computer scientist at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, and she's also the lead for GSFC's Artificial Intelligence Center of Excellence. Dr. Memarsadeghi has 2 decades of experience in scientific data processing, analysis, and visualization for different NASA scientific and engineering applications. And again, I don't want to read the rest of the bios. You can read that in the flyer and save more time for our speaker. So Dr. Memarsadeghi, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thanks for the invitation. Today, I will be talking about different AI ML projects that are happening at that were implemented at Goddard Space Flight Center. So this is mainly showcasing the great work of my colleagues in different areas. I will give a few examples from AI ML applications in different NASA scientific areas in earth sciences, planetary sciences, astrophysics, heliophysics, mentioning a few engineering applications, and then talk about our recently founded GSFC AI Center of Excellence. Starting with earth sciences, as you are all aware, high resolution data imagery is becoming more and more available, and the data volumes are more than what one scientist can sift through efficiently. And with the advent of hardware innovations in GPU technologies and advances in deep learning algorithms, scientists are taking advantage of these greatest advances. And my colleagues, Mark Carroll and his team, used deep learning to identify different agroforestry features using deep learning classification algorithm. They trained the models themselves, and they are this is an output example on Maxar imagery that is less than 2 meter resolution per pixel, and they identify features such as trees, buildings, shadows. And there are other projects funded by NASA for identifying different food crops or environmental features. So all these works that I'm presenting are published, and you can refer to the citations mentioned for more details. The next earth science application is using AI ML to support aquaculture in Chesapeake Bay, using AI to detect poor water quality. So basically, around Chesapeake area, aquaculture is a growing food producing sector. And at the same time, the increasing population near the coast has resulted in more pollutants from land, agriculture, fertilizers, livestock waste, and overflowing sewage. So that all affected adversely the water quality. And state regulators and agencies at Maryland Department of Environment routinely monitor the water quality at Chesapeake Bay, over 800 sites. And if they see that the quality of water is poor based on different thresholds they have for level of bacteria, oxygen levels, and so on and so forth, they close shellfish beds and they prohibit harvesting shellfish, and this affects economy and the food chain and so on. So the goal in this project to come up with techniques that uses all the available data in situ and satellite imagery to help these environmental monitors and decision makers identify poor water quality quickly and hopefully in future via satellite data. Right now, we don't have indicators of poor water quality using remotely sensed data. They collect in situ measurements by going to the bay, collecting data on boats. And as you can imagine, the spatial and temporal resolution of this data is very sparse and not enough as much as we wish to have. So we are hoping to use AI ML to find predictors of poor water quality and in future have ways of identifying them from satellite. And this is proven to be a more challenging project, and a very challenging project considering different sources of data, resolutions, and a sparsity of in situ data. Now moving on to planetary sciences, most of you are familiar probably with various Mars rovers and landers. These instruments oftentimes collect lots of data, and the communication bandwidth for downlinking that is little, and also the instruments are located hundreds of millions of kilometers away from Earth, so they need to travel a long distance. So instead, scientists oftentimes try to use AI ML techniques on board to reduce the data that will be downlinked either to an intelligent informed data, so that they, instead of downlinking all the hyperspectral data, they can send classified imagery of, let's say, rocks and craters, or the artificial intelligence can help scientists identify the higher the more interesting data that scientists might be definitely need to look at. So in this work, Dr. Victoria DePoyan and colleagues trained an artificial intelligence system to analyze hundreds of rock samples and thousands of experimental spectra from Mars Organic Molecular Analyzer, or MOMA instrument, that will land on Mars around in 2023 as part of the ExoMars Rosalind Franklin rover. And they were able to, with a good accuracy, predict whether a sample corresponds to a real world sample. For example, they can say with 91% confidence, we know that this is 87% made of phospholipids, similar, because it is very similar to a sample that was previously observed on such and such date. So this is one application. Another application of AI in planetary images is for identifying transverse aeolian ridges, or TARs. These are morphological features that are they are unique to Mars. They are fossilized dunes. We don't have them on Earth, and identifying them, understanding how their distribution on Mars and their what they are made of can help scientists understand the climate on Mars that helped in creating and forming them, and better understanding the history of Mars. So in this project, Tim McClanahan at Goddard and his colleagues, they trained a neural network using high-rise images, which is the high resolution instrument ever deployed to another planet. And then they adopted an off-the-shelf neural network called RetinaNet, which was originally developed to identify to classify different objects. They trained it for the planetary application for identifying stars at a 50-meter scale. And then once they trained their model, they were able to identify these features with high precision of almost 93% accuracy. And the model also shows promising results for applications to other surfaces, other features on surfaces like ripples and polygon terrain. And their future work includes applying the model more broadly and generating a large database of star distributions on Mars. Next, applications in astrophysics are data scientist Brian Powell with astrophysicist Veselin Kostov at Goddard recently made a discovery of the first 6-star system found ever. They were able to do that by analyzing NASA's Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, or TESS, and taking advantage of AI/ML techniques. So basically, they analyze data using autonomous software trained to recognize the telltale brightness dips of eclipsing binaries. Initially, their goal was to identify systems that have 2 stars or are binaries. So our solar system, as you know, we have 1 sun. There are systems that may have 2 suns, and they were interested in identifying those. And the way they do is they look at the tail brightness of the spectra of these stars, and when they form an eclipse or they pass through each other, there is a dip in their brightness. And by looking at these dips in their brightness, in their spectra, they identify how many stars the system have. While they were looking for binaries, there were surprising results, and they discovered the first ever 6-star system, which was possible with the power of supercomputers at Goddard and using AI/ML algorithms. And related to the same project, a summer intern, Adam Friedman, who was working with Brian Powell, also he was tasked with basically collecting training data set. He didn't initially have much machine learning or astrophysics background, and he quickly learned a lot of things during the short period of time and helped Brian Powell to construct these light curves with test data. And they used 129,000 core supercomputer at NASA's Center for Climate Simulation at Goddard to build millions of different light curves. And then their goal was again to identify eclipsing binaries. And once they trained their models on the binary systems, Friedman found 8 new candidates for quadruple star systems. Those are systems with 4 suns. And on the right is an example of how the spectra of light of these stars systems change when you have a binary system on top versus a quadruple at the bottom. There are more dips in the spectra. Now, the next application is in heliophysics, or a study of sun. And again, they are not different from other NASA disciplines. They have tons of data, and finding features in them is like finding a needle in a haystack. And they were interested in identifying the smallest eruptions in solar dynamic observatory data, or as we call SDO. In particular, it's images from atmospheric imaging assembly, or AIA instrument. So they wanted to distinguish between energetic particles that hit the CCD camera images versus single pixel micro events in the solar corona. Basically, they wanted to know, is it a single pixel event that happened on sun, or was it was just a high energy particle hitting the camera? And usually only about 0.01% of these energetic particles are misclassified when they have a solar origin. You may think that's a small number, but when you consider that AIA satellite has recorded over 100 billion discrete events, 0.01% of that is 10 million misclassified microeruptions, which is too many for scientists to ignore. So they trained these images for their particular applications using ML algorithms, and they sped up the input-output infrastructure using the GPU-accelerated CUDA data frames and also GPU hardware, and their work is published. You can see, we can read in the paper for more details. The next application, similarly in heliophysics, is encoding the scientific knowledge into machine learning algorithms for characterizing active regions, coronal holes, and sunspot, basically 3 different features on sun. And if you consider they have over 150 million SDO images with a volume of 6 petabytes, which was collected at a rate of 4,000 pixels every 1.3 seconds. That's a lot of data, and deep learning algorithms for segmentation and GPU accelerated architecture and data frames are well suited for, this problem is well suited to take advantage of these advances. And again, their results are published. And this is the video. And another application of interest is that recently National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, held a hackathon competition earlier this year for being able to better predict a metric they use for predicting severity of solar storms. And that metric is called Disturbance Storm Index. And basically what it does, what happens is there is a transfer of energy from solar winds to Earth's magnetic field. And when this transfer of energy occurs, there is massive geomagnetic storms that cause disruptions to our GPS systems, satellite communications, electronic power, and even to life and property. So this index is a good indicator of how severe these storms are gonna be, and how decision makers can better prepare for its implications. So they had a competition to push the boundary of predictive performances using AI ML, and they wanted the algorithm to run on real-time solar wind data as it's being fed to the algorithm under operationally viable constraints. And on their website, you can see the winners and their code and description, more details about this competition, as well as data sets that you can work with. Those were some examples in different NASA scientific applications, but we also have a lot of engineering applications for AI/ML algorithm. After all, we are building all these instruments and satellites and launching them, and there are a lot of engineering activities. I touch base on some of them by names. Examples are spacecraft autonomy. So you want to have a rover navigate the train, basically maybe semi-automatically, like an automated car, without hitting an obstacle, or by avoiding craters, or in improving instrument calibrations, as there are many sources of jitter and movement in data from the spacecraft itself, from the environment around it, and so forth. And so, for example, the Mars 2020 rover that recently landed on Mars was taking advantage of a real-time terrain mapping and processing for hazard avoidance and safe landing. And that software is called Terrain Relative Navigation, or TRN, and it basically matches onboard sensor data to a map of a landing area to avoid hazardous areas. And Perseverance Mars rover also has an auto-nav software for autonomous driving mode to reach specific coordinates by avoiding craters and rocks. And as you can see, there are different applications and different sources of data. challenges that NASA colleagues are working on for in different aspects of AI ML. So we recently felt the need to have a community for our AI ML practitioners. In spring of 2020, we founded with my colleagues a AI Center of Excellence at Goddard to serve as a focal point, serving our Goddard AI community of practice, whether they are in helioanalytics, cloud computing, astrophysics, engineering, to learn about each other's experiences of the latest algorithms advances, to help each other with their technical challenges. We hold monthly seminars as well as office hours, which are more informal for open discussion. We inform our community about upcoming training opportunities that are available to them, or we or even help have some of the form these training opportunities or workshops. And also, as I mentioned, we have supercomputing resources and cloud computing resources in our center to help the scientists and engineers how to access and utilize these services for their applications, as well as inform them about different funding opportunities or partnership opportunities with not only among themselves in different organizations of NASA, but also with outside organizations in academia and industry. So we also helped co-organize 4 workshops. The first NASA AI workshop was held in November of 2018 at NASA Goddard, and then we had a workshop on a specialized topic of using AI ML for science strategic planning and prioritization. The idea is to augment National Academy of Sciences science prioritization methodology that they do through these decadal surveys. We submitted a white paper to Astro 2020 decadal survey with our suggestion on this topic, which is available for you to read. And also we helped co-organize the second NASA AI workshop earlier this year in collaboration with NASA JPL that was hosted by NASA JPL. And just 2 weeks ago, we had a joint NASA UMD AI in Earth Sciences AI ML workshop. All these workshops have websites and booklets and reports with tons of information that I invite you to visit. The last workshop report is being worked on currently since this just happened, but hopefully it should be there. The report should be there in a month or so. But above all, our goal at Goddard's AI Center of Excellence is to build partnerships. We have many ways for you to get involved and work on NASA applications. For students, we have an internship program that you can apply to by going to intern.nasa.gov, creating an account, browsing opportunities, and keep in mind that NASA has different centers across the nation, so be mindful of the location you apply to if the location you have a constraint of where to work or to apply to. For now, most internships are virtual, so that list constraint is a bit alleviated, but in the near future, this may not be the case. We have a NASA postdoctoral program, and they accept applications for postdoc positions, I think 2 times a year. You can check the website. Usually scientists or engineers post their different research scientific problems, and you apply by proposing a research, by writing a research proposal of how you want to go solve it. You apply to the program by writing a research proposal. There are NASA federal positions listed, of course, on usajobs.gov, which I invite you to monitor if you are interested in NASA jobs, and including pathways programs. Pathways are student programs similar to internships, but they are really a pathway to get a federal job. By being a pathway student intern, you become a civil servant. You work during summers or winter breaks while you are a student and taking classes during semester, and you have a higher chance of being converted to a full-time employee upon graduation. And 2 times a year, these pathway positions are released. We just closed 1 round in September. I think the next round may come out early in the spring, maybe in February. Of course, with academia and other industry partners, we can write research grants. And there is a very nice program for graduate students, NASA Space Technology Graduate Research Opportunities, that funds your graduate PhD studies while working on a NASA-related research problem in collaboration with a NASA mentor, a NASA scientist and engineer. It's a very neat and generous program with stipends and salary. Similarly, we have a NASA Early Career Faculty program for young faculty members, and small businesses have their own program to apply to. And finally, I would like to highlight a joint public-private partnership between NASA and industry called Frontiers Development Lab that is hosted by SETI Institute and I believe Caltech in California. Every year they admit a class of data scientists over a course of 8 to 10 weeks in summer, and they form diverse teams to work on previously identified NASA data science problems. And at the end of the 8 weeks, there is usually a deliverable code published on GitHub with a paper publication. And their website has all the past year's projects, code, reports, and it has a wealth of information. I invite you to visit and learn from. With that, I thank you for your participation and this opportunity to present. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Memarsadeghi. Now we are at the question and answer phase of our presentation. Before we start, I want to thank again both our speakers for the great presentations. So I will start with the first question for Dr. Briones. So the question is from one of our attendees asking that this problem reminds me of the following scenario: driving down a road, looking at the beautiful lakes through the leaves of the trees lining the road. Our brain completes the missing pieces. Would it be worthwhile to add another layer to the network? That is, for example, receiving live video footage from a remote camera to allow the AI to just guess and fill in the gaps in the sequence. I think you are muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so that's a good question. Depends on the mission or the experiment that you're doing. In the case for the drop data anywhere, the data is stored in the spacecraft that may or may not have a camera. So the data will be sent when the link is established, and it will replace those last fragments. The idea is good for a balloon experiment. We did this 2 summers ago. We had a payload where we had a camera and was taking live video from it, and that could have been, you know, a layer that could sit on top of that model. But there will be, you know, we will have to develop more scripts to it. But it is a good idea. Like I said, right now the spacecrafts don't have that capability. So, but for more of the, you know, balloon experiments, I think it could be, you know, something that we can possibly consider and do.
Thank you very much. So next question is for Dr. Memarsadeghi. Would it be possible to remotely access water quality? For example, use surrogate markers such as presence of green wavelengths as a result of presence of chlorophyll, etc. So, or maybe in conditions with poor oxygenation should be associated with a lower pH level, etc.
Yes, very good question. Actually, that's exactly what we are trying to do. We have these relationship with in situ data. We know how they correlate the algae blooms with oxygen level or pH, but what are the optimal wavelengths and how to basically, what are the signatures, the spectral signatures from remotely sensed data to best identify them in absence of in situ data is also, yes, we are actually looking for those surrogate predictors, exactly.
Thank you very much. And next question is again for Dr. Memarsadeghi. I think, how do models run on a spacecraft, such as a radiation hardened computing resources?
Yes, so actually, there are a whole group at NASA Goddard. My colleagues have been working on different generations of hardwares that are space flight qualified and radiation hardened. So initially it started with a space cube and then CubeSats, and now they're even advancing to, so as the next generations come, they get smaller with more processing power. So there are developing then or have already some next generation versions that are having some of these processing units capable of handling machine learning that are radiation hardened. So a group handles that, building the hardware that is flight ready and can manage the computation.
Thank you very much. Next question, I mean, either a speaker can take that, is there a similar NASA AI group or program in NASA's human research program? I think they meant probably human exploration mission directorate, maybe.
There might be right now, my memory doesn't help me, but there is a NASA AI website, ai.nasa.gov, which highlights different activities of agencies. So I would suggest checking there to see if they mention anything about human exploration applications.
Thank you very much. Dr. Briones, do you want to add anything to that? Or?
No, I was going to refer the same website. I think every center goes to that website to post, the projects that we're working on. And so there is, it's a good website because it provides you links to AI ML training, the different projects, papers, so links to conferences, presentations. So yeah, I would definitely suggest going into that website to get more information. I don't know, especially for the human exploration program, but for other programs, there is information there.
Thank you very much again, both of our speakers. We're almost out of time. And before we close, I just want to mention that in addition to the workshops and resources that our presenter showed you, next week, NASA Glenn Research Center is hosting IEEE International Conference on Wireless for Space. And one of the topics there is also artificial intelligence. So I invite you also to try to attend that conference, which is virtual. Next week. And I also want to invite everybody to attend our next AI webinar here on November 4th, which would be on the topic of AI for healthcare. And we have Director of NIH, NIBIB going to make a presentation about health-related applications of AI. So again, thanks very much everyone for attending. Thank you our sponsors, IEEE and University of Maine, Office of Vice President for Research, and we hope to see you in the future AI event. Have a great day, everyone.